Fernando Mendoza's meteoric rise over the past 2 weeks is exposing a shocking truth about Shedeur Sanders that nobody in the NFL wants to say publicly, but that scouts and coaches are whispering about privately. Shedeur might not even be the best quarterback in this draft class, and the hype around him has more to do with his last name and his father's media empire than it does with his actual on-field performance. According to sources who've been tracking how NFL teams are reevaluating their quarterback boards after Mendoza's incredible pro day performance and private workout results, at least 4 teams that had Shedeur ranked as their QB1 have now moved Mendoza ahead of him, and several other teams are seriously reconsidering whether paying the Shedeur premium, both in draft capital and in dealing with Deion's baggage, is worth it when Mendoza offers similar or better arm talent without any of the drama. And the most damning detail that's emerging from these reevaluations, according to sources who've spoken with scouts who've studied both quarterbacks extensively, is that when you remove the name on the back of the jersey and just watch the tape, Mendoza consistently makes better decisions under pressure, shows better pocket awareness, and demonstrates more natural leadership than Shedeur does. This isn't about Mendoza being a feel-good story or a draft riser. This is about the NFL scouting community realizing they might have been blinded by the Deion Sanders spectacle into overrating his son. The Fernando Mendoza story began to truly accelerate approximately 2 weeks ago, according to sources who've tracked his pre-draft journey, when Mendoza participated in a private quarterback workout event in Southern California that was attended by scouts and coaches from approximately 20 NFL teams. According to sources who were present at that workout, Mendoza, who played his college ball at California and who wasn't considered a top-tier prospect coming into the pre-draft process, absolutely dominated every drill and measurement in ways that had scouts immediately texting their front offices that they needed to take another serious look at this quarterback. According to sources familiar with Mendoza's workout performance, he threw the ball with exceptional velocity and accuracy in all the standard passing drills, completing over 90% of his throws, including several deep balls that traveled 60-plus yards in the air with perfect placement. But what really impressed the scouts, according to sources, was Mendoza's performance in the situational drills that simulate game pressure, where quarterbacks have to make quick decisions with defensive pressure being simulated by coaches rushing at them. According to sources, Mendoza showed elite pocket movement, stepping up and sliding laterally to avoid pressure while keeping his eyes downfield, and he consistently made the right reads and threw to the right targets, even when the drill got chaotic. That workout performance, according to sources, caused several teams to request individual private workouts with Mendoza so they could evaluate him more thoroughly and compare him directly to other quarterback prospects they were considering. And according to sources who've been briefed on those individual workouts, which happened over the past week and a half, Mendoza continued to perform at an extremely high level, answering questions about his football IQ and his ability to process complex offensive systems that some teams had as concerns based on his college production. But the real turning point in how NFL teams view Fernando Mendoza, according to sources familiar with internal scouting discussions at multiple organizations, came when scouts started going back and re-watching Mendoza's college tape specifically to compare his decision-making and mechanics to Shedeur Sanders' tape. And according to sources, what those scouts found when they did that comparison was eye-opening and uncomfortable, because it revealed that many of the same scouts who'd been praising Shedeur's tape for months had been giving him more credit than his actual performance warranted, while being more critical of Mendoza for similar or even better plays.
According to sources who've spoken with scouts who've done this comparative analysis, when you watch Shedeur Sanders' college tape looking for objective quarterback evaluation criteria like pre-snap reads, progressions through receiver options, accuracy under pressure, and decision-making in critical situations, Shedeur grades out as very good but not elite. According to sources, Shedeur has excellent arm talent and quick release mechanics, and is very good at executing the first read in his progression. But, according to sources, when Shedeur gets to his second or third read, or when the play breaks down and he has to improvise, his performance becomes significantly more inconsistent. By contrast, according to sources who studied Mendoza's tape, he consistently works through his progressions efficiently, rarely forces throws into coverage, and shows excellent awareness of when to take what's available versus when to take a sack or throw the ball away. According to sources, Mendoza's arm isn't quite as naturally gifted as Shedeur's in terms of velocity and the aesthetic of his throwing motion, but his ball placement is actually more consistent, and his ability to throw receivers open rather than just throwing to open receivers is arguably better.
The most damning element of this comparative analysis, according to sources, is what it reveals about unconscious bias in scouting. According to sources who've spoken with scouts who've admitted to this, many evaluators gave Shedeur more benefit of the doubt on questionable decisions or inaccurate throws because they assumed that someone with his pedigree and with his father's coaching must know what he's doing, while they were more critical of Mendoza's similar mistakes because he doesn't have the same name recognition or support system. According to sources, when scouts started grading both quarterbacks using identical standards without considering context or background, the gap between them narrowed significantly, or in some evaluators' opinions, disappeared entirely. The impact this reevaluation is having on NFL draft boards is significant and growing, according to sources who've spoken with personnel executives at multiple teams. According to sources, at least 4 teams that previously had Shedeur Sanders ranked as their clear QB1 in this draft class have now moved Fernando Mendoza ahead of him on their boards, based on the combination of Mendoza's workout performances and the tape reevaluation. According to sources, several other teams that had Shedeur and Mendoza ranked closely together have now created more separation in Mendoza's favor. And according to sources, even teams that still have Shedeur ranked higher are now acknowledging internally that the gap isn't as large as they initially thought, and that Mendoza represents better value if he's available later in the draft.
The Cleveland Browns' situation with Shedeur Sanders is particularly relevant to this conversation, according to sources familiar with how the Fernando Mendoza rise is being discussed in league circles. According to sources, several NFL executives are privately questioning whether the Browns made a mistake by going all in on Shedeur with the massive commitments to Deion and with the opt-out clause, when they could have potentially landed Mendoza with a later pick or through trade without any of the baggage and drama that comes with the Sanders package. According to sources, some executives believe the Browns got so caught up in the Deion-Shedeur spectacle and in trying to generate headlines that they didn't do enough objective evaluation of whether Shedeur was actually worth the premium they paid. The Atlanta Falcons, who according to Jason LaCanfora's reporting were supposedly locked in on their secret quarterback plan, are now rumored to be reconsidering their entire approach based on Mendoza's rise, according to sources who've heard whispers from Atlanta's front office. According to sources, if the Falcons were genuinely planning to draft a quarterback rather than trade for a veteran, Mendoza's emergence as a legitimate QB1 candidate changes their calculus because they could potentially get similar or better quarterback value at 8th overall with Mendoza than they would have gotten with Shedeur at 3rd overall if they traded up. The broader quarterback market implications of Fernando Mendoza's rise are substantial, according to sources who understand draft dynamics and team strategies. According to sources, if multiple teams now view Mendoza as comparable to Shedeur, it reduces the leverage that teams picking in the top 5 have to demand massive compensation from teams that want to trade up for Shedeur, because those teams can now argue they have an alternative option in Mendoza if the price for Shedeur is too high. According to sources, this dynamic could actually cause Shedeur to fall further in the draft than anyone expected if teams decide they'd rather wait and take Mendoza later than pay the premium for Shedeur early. Deion Sanders' reaction to Fernando Mendoza's rise and to the suggestion that Shedeur might be overrated has been defensive and dismissive, according to sources who monitor Deion's media appearances and social media activity.
According to sources, Deion has been making comments in interviews and on social media about how scouts overthink things and how resume and production should matter more than workout performances, which sources interpret as Deion recognizing that Mendoza's strong workouts are threatening Shedeur's draft positioning. According to sources, Deion has also been emphasizing Shedeur's intangibles and leadership qualities, which sources view as an attempt to shift the conversation away from pure on-field evaluation, where Mendoza is closing the gap.
Shedeur Sanders himself has not publicly addressed the Fernando Mendoza comparisons, but according to sources who've spoken with people in Shedeur's camp, he's aware of the narrative that's developing and is frustrated by it. According to sources, Shedeur views the Mendoza hype as recency bias and workout warrior syndrome, where scouts get too excited about measurables and short-term performances rather than focusing on years of college production and big game performances. According to sources, Shedeur believes that once NFL teams actually have to make their draft decisions and commit to quarterbacks for their franchises, they'll choose proven winners like him over workout performers like Mendoza. The truth that NFL scouts are discovering through Fernando Mendoza's rise, according to sources who've been involved in these evaluation discussions, is that quarterback scouting is incredibly difficult, and that bias, both conscious and unconscious, affects evaluations more than anyone wants to admit. According to sources, scouts are trained to be objective and to evaluate players based on performance rather than narrative. But the reality is that names, backgrounds, and storylines all influence how evaluators see players. And according to sources, the Shedeur-Mendoza comparison is exposing how much the Deion Sanders factor influenced initial evaluations of Shedeur in ways that weren't entirely warranted by his actual tape. The other truth that's being exposed, according to sources, is that the gap between top quarterback prospects in any given draft class is usually much smaller than the public discourse suggests. According to sources, teams and media create tiers and separations between quarterbacks to make the draft more dramatic and to justify their decisions. But the reality is that the difference between QB1 and QB3 or QB4 in most drafts is marginal and often comes down to scheme fit and development rather than pure talent. And according to sources, if Fernando Mendoza continues to perform well in interviews and private workouts over the next 2 months, he could easily end up being viewed as equivalent to Shedeur by draft day. As of now, Thursday, February 27, 2026, Fernando Mendoza's rise is forcing the NFL scouting community to confront uncomfortable truths about how they've evaluated Shedeur Sanders and whether the Deion Sanders hype machine influenced their assessments more than they'd like to admit. Whether Mendoza actually ends up being better than Shedeur won't be known for several years until both have had opportunities to play NFL football. But what's already clear is that the assumption that Shedeur is the undisputed QB1 in this class is being seriously challenged, and the teams are recognizing that Fernando Mendoza might offer equal or better value without any of the drama and complications that come with the Sanders package.
Fernando Mendoza's rise is exposing that Shedeur Sanders might be overrated, with scouts discovering that when you grade them objectively, Mendoza makes better decisions under pressure and shows more consistent mechanics. At least 4 teams have moved Mendoza ahead of Shedeur on their boards after re-evaluating tape without Deion's hype influencing them. The uncomfortable truth is that bias made scouts give Shedeur more credit than his performance warranted, while being harder on Mendoza for similar plays.